So to understand what's going on, I need to teach some basic geopolitical theory, okay? So in military affairs, in geopolitics, there's a concept called escalation ladder. Escalation ladder. Okay? And the dominant theory is that whoever has escalation dominance has the most advantage. Okay, so what this means is, let's just say you and I get in a fight, okay? I have a knife, you have a gun. Well, a gun is more dominant than a knife. Therefore, you have a greater advantage over me, and therefore you should win, in theory, okay? And applied to this war in the Middle East, Israel and the United States have escalation dominance because they have nuclear weapons, and Iran doesn't. Therefore, the United States and Israel have a huge advantage over Iran, okay? But what I will show you today is that this theory is incorrect. It actually doesn't work that way, right? So let's start off with a very simple example. Let's just say that two people get into a fight, okay? A and B. And how the escalation ladder will work is that maybe A and B run into each other, okay? And then A says, hey man, say sorry. And then B's like, it's not my fault, you say sorry, okay? So there's a conflict, and it's usually a very small conflict. No one knows why, and no one knows who's at fault, okay? So they start cursing each other, okay? So the first step is a conflict. Second step is they start cursing each other, right? Screw you, screw you. And then they might start pushing each other, right? Push, push. And then they hit each other, okay? Punch, punch. And then they start the fight. And then one pulls out a knife and the other pulls out a gun. All right? And then B shoots dead A. Fight over, right? Okay. So there are certain things that we need to keep in mind about this example. First of all, the fight is not contained in itself, okay? You cannot perceive this game as just one between A and B, who's physically stronger. There are other players involved as well. Okay, so for example, there are spectators or friends. There's a crowd watching you, okay? This is important because there's also the police, right? Eventually the police will come, the government, and they'll ask people, hey, what happened, man? Whose fault was it, right? And also, for people who are religious, there's also God, right? If you die, you have to go up to God, heaven, and God's going to ask you, hey man, how did you die? So you have to explain how you died, all right? So in other words, in this escalation ladder, there's three factors that you have to consider that drive people up this escalation ladder. These three factors are, of course, emotions. Second is power. And the third is reason or logic. Okay? And what drives people up is adrenaline. In other words, it is impossible to skip the escalation ladder, right? You don't go from like, hey, screw you, to like the guy pulling out a gun and shooting you, okay? You have to go up step by step by step because adrenaline is rushing in your system. And this adrenaline, it's making you more angry, but it's also making you stronger and more resolved. And it's also telling you how to fight this battle, okay? And the thing to remember about this is really important, is that it's not about how fast you climb up the escalation ladder, okay? If you get too angry and you overreact, then you are at fault, right? What you want to do is climb it up strategically, and that means you have to remain calm and controlled. Because if you remain calm and controlled, you have three advantages over your opponent. The first is focus, second is clarity, and the third is focus, you're clear, and resolve. Okay, sorry, resolve. Okay, what this means is that you know what you're doing, you have a strategy, you're clear about how to achieve your strategy and your goal, and you are determined to achieve it, okay? But in order to have all three, you have to remain calm, and therefore you need to control yourself as you climb up this escalation ladder. Because remember, it's just not about being your opponent, it's about justifying yourself to your friends, to the police, and to God as well. Because you might hit that person, he might go to the hospital, and you've won the fight, but then you go to prison for 10 years, in which case you've lost the fight. Okay? All right? So the main idea I want you to remember is this, and this is the law of escalation. And this is a very important idea in my game theory model. Control is more important than dominance. Okay? Control is more important than dominance. Why? Because control is the idea of calibration. Calibration means that you time or you structure or you strategize your response in a way that helps you achieve your strategic objective. Okay? You're not just throwing punches, you're throwing a punch in a certain way that allows you to defend yourself, that strikes fear in the opponent, and also allows you to seem as the good guy among spectators. Okay? And then when the police come, you can justify why you threw that punch in a certain way to the police so that you don't go to jail. Okay? Alright, so another way of saying this is that calibration is ultimately about strategic flexibility.